And that's pretty much like the main topic of today. So building a board game and how to make it responsive. Okay, so the reason why I thought of this is because, again, I really want to push the limits when it comes to training in Axure. What you usually get when you go into training is this booklet that you take home, usually are just like the PowerPoint they show you and so on and so forth. My vision is that I'm going to have a great breadth of puzzles. And it could be from the most basic interaction all the way to intermediate interaction. So I think this is more of an intermediate interaction than a basic one. And when you go home or you go back to work, you can remember those puzzles and say, you know what, it would be perfect to use this right here. And you can go back to that library and say, oh, I remember this. I can't quite remember exactly how to do it. Let me revise what I learned. And then you can grab it. And you can actually, it's kind of a style guide concept, right? You drag that master into your prototype. In this case, it'll be a little bit different. But that's kind of the idea, to give you something to take home that's interactive. The other thing I realized is that Axure in itself is a really heavy program. You have to run it in a laptop. There's no really way to practice on the go your Axure skills, unless you actually have the laptop on your lap in the tube, like I do all the time. Anyways, so I wanted to do something kind of like Duolingo kind of thing. How many of you have played with Duolingo? Okay, a few of you. It's just so cool, right? You got 2 minutes to spare and the bus is coming and you can just do something really quick. So I kind of envisioned that to be what I wanted to kind of give away at the end of the training. So I said, I gotta come up with a responsive pretty much version of it so people can just later on train if they want to. So this is what we worked on. So pretty much my own brief, as I wrote it to myself, it had to support all the views, so how to play it, the controller. So one thing I didn't show you is that the skyline, you can actually interact, and it would allow you to put some logic there. In this case, there's no logic as long as you actually make sure that when it loads is hidden, you're good to go. So, but it could get really tricky and you can have extra stuff going on. So I wanted to support different kind of views, and these are of course gonna become dynamic panels. I want it to be easy to move the pieces from the sandbox into the right place. So most of you maybe already start thinking about stacking the cases, right? What else can you do in mobile? But what if you want to drag the biggest piece, the piece that's higher up, all the way down? How do you do that in mobile? Are you just going to drag? And remember, as you're dragging, you cannot scroll, right? So think of all the gestures. So I needed an easy way to kind of bring it back and forth. So the other thing I'm really interested in is performance. This is something that it has to be running on the Wi-Fi or your 4G or whatever. So it has to perform. And it also, the scalability aspect of it. So I envision this to become 20, 25, 50 different puzzles that I can just kind of change a few things around and voila, you have another way of approaching this. So I could make a puzzle where the actual controller is a state, right? Why not? That's a good way to kind of get you to where I just to show you. So this is what I came up with, okay? So the idea is that you can always see what you're supposed to be building. The interactions are here, and they are stacked. And then I created a concept of a little drawer, okay? So as you interact with those dots, it opens up the drawer, and then you can start collecting the pieces or dragging the pieces down. I'm not saying this is the absolute perfect solution. I'm just sharing what I came up with. I also came up with some other concepts. So for example, making this transparent. So if it gets really, really long, you can utilize most of the screen as you're looking around, but you have to be truthful to the physics of it, right? So if you have something, you have to start kind of thinking, is that on my drawer, but the bottom of the drawer is transparent, or is it under it? So that's an interesting one. So I kind of created a view where you can toggle from just solid to a transparent drawer bottom. And then I also needed to support, some help parts. So I worry that people may not get what the controller and what the skyline is. So I kind of wanted to start drawing relationships between what they saw over there to what's going on here. So kind of how to play it. And then of course talk about the batch and blah, blah, blah. So that's why I need to support 3 views at least. So this is what it looks like. I'm gonna show you actually how I built it in Axure. But in the meantime, oh, by the way, if you wanna try it in your mobile, you can. Oh, my mom is over there. So it would be the exact same thing as, so I don't know if you noticed, but I do have a bit.ly in those puzzles I share with you. If you add an extra M, you will be able to get to the mobile version. So I haven't quite make it responsive from what you saw, but I'm working on it. And I decided to go mobile first. I have only tested it in iPhone 5 and Windows Phone. So if you have an Android and it looks terrible, sorry, just let me know actually, because I would love to make sure it works for everything. So yeah, so it's bit.ly. In bit.ly is tricky, you have to honor the capitalization. So if it's uppercase, it has to be uppercase, lowercase, it has to be a lowercase. Keep in mind, I'm only gonna have 2 pieces because for the purpose of today, I just wanted to show you kind of how I work for 2 pieces. If I put all the pieces, it's just gonna be too much to go over. Plus I haven't built it, so we'll get there. So the idea is that I can take all the pieces and quickly reproduce them and just kind of say, okay, I have a puzzle that's gonna have 10 different pieces and they're all gonna say different things. This is, again, an MVP. Eventually, I wanna put the logic behind where you can actually try to solve it and check immediately if you got it wrong or if you got it right. And that's the other thing, when I've previously sent the puzzle, some of you have already seen it and solved it, I started getting screenshots. And it was so interesting because my initial idea was, well, you know, you use this and then you go to Axure and then you send me the RP, and then when I get the RP, I open it up, and then suddenly people are sending me screenshots, and I'm like, oh, this is brilliant, because we can actually do this on the go. You think you're finished, you take 2 screenshots, because most likely the fault is gonna be above the second case. Off you go. How cool is that? So anyways, who got it on their phones? Just show hands. Okay, okay. Who found a bug already? Okay. Well, you have an Android. I haven't tested it for Android. Okay, so I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about things I learned. So one of the things I absolutely learned is that the first puzzle should have been mobile first. It was a good idea to kind of validate, but when I then said, oh, I'll go mobile, and then I realized there's no way I'm gonna be able to kind of go from desktop to mobile. So I kind of said, I'm gonna take the essence of what I'm doing, but I'm gonna have to start mobile first. Not to state the obvious. So I set up the breakpoints and work always from the base. So I'm gonna show you the breakpoints and the base. So who wants a 2-second explanation of what I mean by breakpoints and base? Okay, good, that's fine. So what I mean by that is Axure gives you the ability to say, okay, tell me within the width of the screen what we should be showing you. So that's kind of how we do the responsive, it's the adaptive view. So the breakpoints are pretty much what defines that width, where you say, okay, from this to this width, this is what you should be showing. From this to this width, this is what you should be showing. So that's pretty much what I mean. And then the way it works is that it creates a base, and then from there, and this is something you would determine. There's a few different combinations, and then from there everything kind of becomes a child of that base, and what that does is that it allows you to quickly kind of bring elements in and out, and then once you start shaping things differently, you can say, okay, I'm gonna definitely keep this picture, but it needs to be bigger for the tablet version, or it needs to be like this for the desktop version, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what it means. Okay, so this is actually the theme from last time. We talked about debugging last time. And every time I do something really, really complex like this, I always set up my debugging strategy. Why? Because this is very complex. And actually, this time I realized that I could approach it both ways, okay? So what do I mean by debugging, number one? Debugging means that when you start doing things so complex, using some logic, sometimes you miss something in your thinking, and instead of opening the drawer. Well, I started calling that thing the drawer. You could be closing it, and so on and so forth. And then you have to go back and say, where did my logic fail? And then what am I going to do to change that? So one of the things I do is I debug at a localized level. So I take, within an event, I can take one of my pretty much cases, and then I turn it off. And then I said, okay, and I'll show you the global variable, what I call it, in order to think about it as I'm going through it. So I said, okay, from this event, I have 4 cases. I don't want case number 2 because I think that's what's causing the bug. So I switch it off immediately. I don't have to delete it. I don't have to kind of like figure out what's wrong. All I need to do is retrieve my steps so I can go back on track. So that was what I call localized debugging. And then there's global debugging, which may not be the right word, but what I mean is sometimes, and in particular one, and when I work on some TV prototype, I did that quite a bit as well. You need to know where the cursor is, or you need to know where your counter is, or whatever that's helping you with the logic. So sometimes you need to just kind of bring these numbers forward. So if you can imagine, for dragging things like that, it is very important to understand where your cursor is, especially when you're tapping, right? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you optimize for touch. But I realized that I wanted to turn things on and on really quick. And then when you have so many elements that carry the same code, then you have to kind of track it back. So what I did is I set up a global variable where I can just say, all right, help me debug, turn this on, and then everything appears. I'll show you with more details, but that's what I mean by global and local debugging techniques. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm going really fast. No? Okay, good. Stop me if you have any questions. Okay, so the other thing I've been doing quite a bit is trying my best to put global variables where I can. Because what that's going to allow me to do is to scale my prototype. And it's interesting because I'm not going to grow it. I'm just going to duplicate it really fast. And the smarter I get about using global variables, the faster I can do this. So what's global variables, someone may ask? Yeah? Okay, yes, global variables. So global variables is the one and only piece of memory that you can possibly get with Axure, okay? So it pretty much means that you would set up a name for a variable, and you can actually hold some memory as you go through your prototype. And this is a very good way to do really fancy stuff. So literally, it's just like in algebra, a variable, and it will remember what it was. So you can have counters, you can have actual numbers, you can have letters, you can have different things that will help you eventually. I'll talk to you about where I use global variables. That was really helpful. Optimizing for touch. I think out of everything I did, this was the most interesting yet challenging part of the puzzle. Because when you use a mouse, there's so many things you don't think about. So the fat finger syndrome, is that what you call it? Have you heard of that one? That was a really interesting one. I'm going to show you specific snippets, and then I'll go a little bit farther into what that is. The other thing I missed, let me just start putting some of the... Yeah, so with the opening and closing, at first I'm like, oh, click, and then I realized, wait a minute, we actually swipe quite a bit. So you swipe down, you swipe up, and I was missing that. And one of the things I also learned is that when you click, a hotspot would take care of all your needs. But swipe up and down is not available in a hotspot. So then I kind of have to restructure everything into a dynamic panel. Really quick, what's a hotspot? What's a dynamic panel? So a hotspot is just, as I said, a hotspot. It's just one thing that you don't have to do too much. You just be able to have a notion that you are over that specific area. A dynamic panel, for those of you that are brand new, because I know there's a few of you, it's the holy grail of Axure. It's pretty much the ability to switch. Well, it's so much actually, but it's pretty much what's going to allow you to do a lot of clever interactions. So think of it as a kind of like a window that could change kind of scenes if you need it, and then you can move it around. So if you want to get really clever about something, usually you have to use a dynamic panel, because Axure has a notion of moving the dynamic panel, pulling it, pushing it, changing it, making it invisible, well, so on and so forth. Okay, so the other thing that I also learned was when a click counts and when a drag counts. So I was under the impression, and I think one of the most challenging things about Axure is that, has any of you heard of Fiddler? It's internal Microsoft product, yeah. I think they eventually released it. So Fiddler is, what would you call it, a browser listener? So pretty much you're going on the internet and Fiddler would tell you every single call, every single piece of data you receive, everything. With Axure, sometimes it's a big black box. You don't know if the on-click event was the one that was executed before something else that's coming from some other interaction. So one of the things I was assuming, that then I realized it was the wrong assumption, is that if you drag, you have clicked. So I said, okay, so you first click, and then I put some logic in click, and then after you click, of course you drag, because you just go. Well, actually, if you're fast enough and you go into this, you never click. So that logic you put on a click never gets executed. So those are little things that I learned. So optimizing for touch was a really interesting challenge. Whoops, I just want to say thank you to Peter. But that was at the end, but I'll get back to that. Okay, cool. So, any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you contain the logic inside a function?
So you can kind of call subroutines kind of thing? Like?
It was when you talk about testing before, so a lot of programmers, what happens is if you contain the logic inside a function,
yeah,
then you can basically write a test function for that.
Okay.
So then it's a way to help you debugging. So then
yeah,
you use that function everywhere. So it's quite similar to the first presentation when you were talking about masters. Like master effectively is an object, and an object is a function.
Yeah. So containing it, but you want to just test that snippet, right?
You can contain it inside a function and you can do your debugging very smart. And that was just basically curious to do your debugging from like a programmer's perspective.
Okay, so my background is computer programming, and Axure has been a really interesting kind of thing that I sometimes want to say, oh, if I have a sub, a sub function, or if a sub routine, and then I call the subroutine. There's some things we cannot do. I think what you're specifically talking about, I don't think is possible, but sometimes I think it's not possible for 2 weeks, and then I realize there's some ways to fake the concept from a, data structures, blah, blah, blah perspective or something like that. So I wouldn't say on the spot, no, you cannot do that. I don't know how to do that one specifically.
All your logic is tightly coupled to different elements of the page. One extracted into a function where every
right. But then your expectation would be that you can call that logic anywhere throughout the journey, right? That you, as far as I know, you cannot do, because I would have loved to do that. Yeah, no. So every piece of logic is tied to an element. And then you trigger that logic through the element. So you cannot have kind of dedicated kind of pieces of logic that you can then call from different. So what I do is I literally have one element that I call it master, but this is a different concept of master, not the actual one from Axure. And I said, all right, so I'm going to do the exact same thing here and here. And I just pick one that I'm always going to keep truth to what I want. And then I just copy and paste it. So I have duplications everywhere. I just concentrate on one. So I may be wrong. Maybe there's a way of doing it. I just haven't found it.
Can a piece of code be a part of the master? I mean, like the functionality piece of code can be a part of the master that you can like use as a template as was described before, because then actually you would achieve the same thing. I mean, once it's inside the master, I'm not sure if this is possible.
Actually, yes. So what you do, yes, it could be part of a master, and what you do after that is you have to do something called raising an event. So that's when you start kind of getting really complex into once you create a master, how do you acknowledge the rest of the universe kind of thing. So that's when you have to start saying, all right, so the master is supposed to replicate everywhere, but how do I know where that click is coming from if I have this master here? So then you raise an event. Have you heard of that before?
I mean, I understand the problem.
Yeah, that comes, okay.
I know the solution. I understand the problem that comes from code with master which is not identifiable the moment you use it.
Yeah, it could get tricky. We talked about masters and erasing events last time. So anyways, okay, cool. Any other questions before I dig into the prototype? Okay, who wants to see the actual code inside, or, well, whatever you call it in Axure? Okay, cool. Awesome. Some people are excited. All right. I am. Okay. Bear with me. So for those of you that maybe didn't get it in your phone, I want to show you a really quick tour of what it looks like. And, there we go. This is tricky because, oh, no, this is tiny. Well, this is going to be challenging because the fold is way shorter than the actual. That's all right. I planned for that. That's fine. All right, so this is what it looks like. So the idea is that the drawer is going to help you get to where you want really fast, okay? So this is always going to stay there. So you pin this dynamic panel to the top of your browser. And then let's say you know this logic has to go right at the bottom. Then you just go and you drag it down and off you go. So you save yourself to have this piece all the way down. And keep in mind that as you're dragging down, you cannot scroll down. So that's the biggest challenge, okay? The other thing is, as I said, I created this transparent view, which is going to be kind of nice to communicate a few things. So in this one in particular, I wanted to communicate where the controller was, where the skyline was. So I could show you another example for the London skyline. If it's selected, then I can color code. It may not be a good idea, but that's what I went for. And then you have that. And I also want to I want to be truthful to what we call it in Axure internally, so people can, I mean, the thing is, who finds the interface overwhelming sometimes between the widgets here and the sitemap here, the masters? It could be so overwhelming. You're like, where is this supposed to go? So one of the things I wanted to do was simplify that view, but still be truthful to what the actual program will look like internally. And the other thing I wanted to accomplish with this was a way to even let you to see more, even though you had the drawer open. So there's lots of things going on here. But as I said, it's an MVP, and I thought it would be kind of cool to put it out there and see what people thought about it. So that is a really quick overview. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this here, and I'm going to start going over the actual prototype. Oh, this is going to be challenging. Hold on. So for those of you that find this a little bit too high level, I'm going to, and I'm just talking because maybe you never work with Axure and stuff, I'm going to talk about kind of some basics as to how you set up a prototype, just so that you can take some tips home. And then I may just get a little bit more into detail. So one of the things I do when I set up my prototype is I think about cutting it kind of in half. So there's going to be the top bit, and then there's going to be the bottom bit. And I know it sounds obvious, but sometimes if you don't really think about it in that structure, then it's going to be really difficult to get things from one side to the other. So in this case, I went ahead and I said, okay, this is my top, this is my bottom. And I define my top all the way up to here. So one of the things I have for you today is I actually put it together like this. And I went ahead and I made this like this, because what's happening is that this right here is a dynamic panel that moves up and down, okay? And this here is my bottom part of it. So if you care to, the thing is, I find some people find it easier to learn with paper things, so I'm just gonna pass this around if you may find this useful to maybe. If you don't get one and you want one, just raise your hand. If you don't care for it, just pass it around. It's the teacher in me. I actually have a degree in teaching, so I think about all of these things. That's why I have the calling. Okay. So one of the things you may want to do, just to kind of make it fun, it's cut the paper in half. What do you call it? vertically, I'm sorry, vertically. And then try to get that dotted line out so you can actually literally kind of see how it can slide in and out. I think Axure sometimes could get really overwhelming because there's so many things going on at once. And in a way, I was just trying to kind of help you kind of make it more physical, like, oh, okay, I get it. This is something you slide in and out, so you can kind of understand it a little bit better. So if I show you this, so for example, if you look here, the thing that's dotted is what I call the drawer and the knob, okay? Well, actually, it doesn't have the knob, so it's more like this piece right here, okay? And then the drawer has the knob, so what you pull in and out, and so on and so forth. So everything is into little pieces so that you can, they become dynamic panels. So let me show you, actually, I'll just do this. Let me walk you through all my dynamic panels. Okay. So here's the top. And if you look at the top, I start with the whole drawer hidden all the way up. So it's a negative numbers if you look at the drawer. Because that's the state on load, that's what you want. You don't want to show the drawer, so it's all the way up. So then within the logic, as you click on the knob, I call it the little dots, then everything slides down. So then from there, I have different views for all of the three things that I'm supporting. So the play mode, the controller mode, and the London skyline. And then I have, so for those of you that never heard of dynamic panels, this is a very good example of what a dynamic panel is. So it allows me to kind of have different backgrounds, so I can switch it back and forth according to what I need, okay? And then for the drawer, the puzzle drawer, I have different flavors. So I have the controller, I have the play, so they're all gonna look different. So this is where pretty much the pieces will go. So think about right now, my version doesn't have many pieces on the London skyline. But in the future, I want this to have pieces as well, because this is going to change as well. So I may have a little more complicated kind of a prototype going on, so then you can kind of switch back and forth. So that's the idea, okay? And then the icon, that's pretty much how you turn it into, you know, the one that takes you back to the puzzle, or the one that makes it transparent. Now, here's a little bit of a debugger piece. So as I said before, one of the things that I really need to see sometimes is where is that cursor, okay? What is going on right now? And I'm gonna get back to this because I wanna show you how I treated this at a global level. And then just the knob, which is, you can see it because it's white. Then at the bottom, I have distributed the following way. So you have pretty much everything after the knob and the knob. And then from there, I just have 3 dynamic panels that carries everything that has to do with it. So the bottom is so much easier. And then at a level, at a page level, I just have that guide that turns on, and I have some logic. So if you are in the skyline, then the skyline lights up. If you are in the controller lights up, and so on and so forth. So here's a little piece of advice, because we were looking into this. So here is the state where nothing is selected. How do you change the color of a rectangle in Axure? So I have rectangles and almost a square. How do you change that color with logic? Go ahead.
With the interaction style.
Very good. You have to make it a button, right? So with the interaction style, what you do is you treat it as a button, and that means that you don't have that many choices, right? So if you say, oh, I want it red, blue, and green, no, it's actually, you make it, you're either in selected state, in disabled state, in enabled state, or I guess that's selected. No, enable and selected are 2 different ones, so on and so forth. So that's a little tip of the day. But it's good enough to do things like the one I show you. All right, so that's kind of how my prototype is structured, okay? So, next question, all right? How do I get the piece from the drawer to the bottom bit, okay? So think about the fact that each dynamic panel has actual limits, right? So if you're dragging something and your dynamic panel is 100 pixels high, by the time that you get to 110, that piece kind of ceases to exist from a top level. Did that make sense? So that's the other reason, if I can have one of these. Let me just borrow one. That's one of the reasons I really wanted you to have a physical representation if you did cut it out. Because if this is a dynamic panel in itself, the minute you drag something from here, you're out of bound. So how do I get it from this all the way here? Well, of course, if you have the flap in and out. Dun, 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 dun. That's an American thing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You have to use a very tall dynamic panel, so you use the rest of the paper.
Okay, a very tall dynamic panel. However, how do you change from one dynamic panel to the other? Also, how do you allow the interaction at the back to continue, right? Because if you have a dynamic panel, you're covering everything. Also, how do you pin it so you can go back and forth, right? Because one of the biggest kind of challenges I found is if you want a pin at the top, it has to be a dynamic panel that's pinned at the top, and that's not going to scroll up and down, okay? So, Claire, you want to say something? No? Oh, okay. So how do you go about bringing the piece from the top to the bottom? It could be done. I've done it. Okay, so let me show you again. I'm sorry?
Is that why you need to know where the mouse cursor is? Do you know where the finger is? To know where something's coming in to make something happen in another panel.
Okay, ooh, we're getting somewhere. So we are doing something in one panel.
You know where we finish, and then you know where to start the next one.
Okay, very good. So we are reading what we're doing on the top, so we can do something at the bottom, right? Okay, very good. We're getting closer. So once again, here's my piece, and I'm dragging it down here. Okay, so how do we go about that? Huh?
Just 2 instances.
Yeah, I have 2 pieces. I am pulling smoking mirrors here, okay? If I go slow enough, I literally have 2 pieces that are being carried along. So I have a front piece and a back piece. And I have to make sure they're all synchronized as I go along, because the front piece would only show as they are in the drawer. But the minute I exit, the other one kicks in. All right? Easy, right? Wait until you try to synchronize the coordinates, right? So then you're like, oh yeah, so I'll just copy the x value here and the z and I copy it around. It gets really, really tricky. In fact, if any of you are doing the manual thing, trying it, I have 2 copies of the button, just so that you can kind of play along. So just raise your hand if you care for copies of the pieces. Okay, very good. So, all right, cool. So what I'm trying to demonstrate with this is how you think of coordinates, because the movement on one dynamic panel is going to affect the movement of the other piece in the other dynamic panel. All right, so that's kind of what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Okay, so before I continue, I want to show you the concept of global debugger. But is there any questions so far? Who's bored already? All right. Who's excited? Send me an email. Actually, tweet about this. That's what I should be saying. Okay. So there is a huge, great need to have those coordinates show up. But those coordinates are affected on different levels. So for example, if I'm moving my cursor, right, I'm going to be reading different coordinates. If I grab one of these, then it's not just the cursor, but it's the movement of the piece. So then I have to have a listener. Is that what you would call it? Yeah, something that's listening to the coordinates. at a page level, and then at a button level, and then if I have so remember that for every piece, I have 2 pieces, so then I have to double that, and if I have 10 pieces, it just becomes a nightmare. So what I do is I create a global variable where I call it a global dynamic, global debugger, where I said, okay, do you want to make display the coordinates, yes or no? So for every listener that I have placed in very strategic places, guess what the logic is right now? The logic is yes. So this turns false because my dynamic, my global variable right now is no. So if I were to say yes, I'm just making the listener true for every single instance where I identify I want a listener. So if I reload, ta-da! Do you see the coordinates here? And they're moving along as I go. If I open this up and I start dragging these elements, you saw a bug maybe. You see? Did you see the other piece? It got stuck. I can tell you why, I know. So anyways, now, funnily enough, because I'm listening at different levels, if I were to put this on a mobile device, it won't scroll up and down because it takes over the whole thing. So that's why you really want to switch it off. So I do trials here really quick, and then I switch it off, and then I deploy it. I don't really deploy it. I just upload it to Axure, and then I try it on my mobile. So it's a lot of try and error, try and error. OK, cool. So let me turn this off. Well, actually, no. I'm going to leave it on, because the next thing I'm going to show you is actually really cool. OK, so before I move on, let me show you what I mean with this thing. So for those of you that are new to Axure, we have different levels of logic, or where to place the logic. So we have it at a component level, and that's usually displayed here. I'm sorry, I'm squeezing in so much stuff in here. So if I were to take this down, okay, here we go. Then I have all my my logic here for all my cases, all the events that triggered that logic. But also at a page level, you also have some logic, okay? So I'm gonna show you how I did that at a page level. So at a page level, if I'm just going around with my cursor everywhere, what I do is I put the logic and I said, okay, so display the text of what cursor.x is. So that's what's pretty much tracking my movement. For y, for x, and for y. But the value equals to yes. So that means that if that global variable equals to no, that's not going to be executed. But if it equals to yes, that means it is going to be executed. And that's a really quick way to turn things on and off. So think of the logic ahead of time and give it meaningful names. So if you look at some of my global variables, they have really long names, but they have to mean something. And that's not my global variables. Puzzle piece, so for example, is drawer open? So then it's like, no, it's not, right? Because later on, it's just going to become an absolute nightmare to understand what that global variable means. So do put some logic like into the name. Exclude this snippet. So this was what previously I called the debugger global variable, and then I forgot what the yes mean, and then so I just said, do I exclude this snippet of code? Yeah, okay, cool. So that's not going to be executed. In this case, I have another one for looking at the back piece. So the one that's moving around, I sometimes need to do it, see it for debugging purposes. Display coordinates. Yeah, display coordinates. That's all I need to do. So it just takes you through all these little complicated kind of ways of executing logic, and it kind of makes it natural language in a way. Any questions so far? Okay. Let me show you some of the actual logic within the buttons. And this is actually one of the most painful learning, which you're going to take for free today. How do you track these coordinates, okay? So one of the things I want you to think about is, where is 0, 0 star in the page? And by 0, 0, I mean x equals to 0, y equals to 0. Where does it start in a dynamic panel? And how do you do the relationship between them, right? So at a page level, well, of course, it's at the corner up. but at a dynamic panel level is where the dynamic panel starts. So you're gonna have an offset of Y and X that you need to track as you're going along. And you need to be really smart about it because it has to look seamless, right? You don't really get to see that other piece turning on or coming in. So I created this kind of way of tracking it. So if you look, so this is just for debugging. Oh, and by the way, name your cases debugging. So just kind of keep track of what things you're just playing with and what things already made it to the build. Okay, so here, for example, I'm starting to track my current value for X. Now, if you want to take one thing out of tonight, is this. I assume that x.cursor was going to be a variable. So that thing reading my cursor, I'm like, oh, that's a variable, so I can treat it as a variable, so I just add the offset and blah, 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 and it kept breaking. Well, it's actually a function. So that's why I actually have to isolate it and create a whole global variable just to hold that value. Keep in mind, talking about performance, I don't think this performs really well because every movement of my X, I have to put into a global variable so I can come back and read it. But the function on itself would not play nice with my other variable. So this offset is an actual number. So I realized that the offset was 340 pixels. So that's how I get them synchronized. But it was really hard to find out that I needed to separate one and the other and then bring them together. So that's pretty much what I'm doing. So as you drag it, so for example, is the drawer open? Yes, it's open, right? Again, use natural language when you're setting up these variables. All right, the drawer is open. What's the first thing you do? Okay, you can start moving it, moving the cursor, the piece and so on and so forth. The other thing I did is I created an area for the actual piece to be on the drawer. So I check the drawer is open, yes, and it's on the actual drawer. So it's under like a hotspot. So then I can understand what the interaction should be because the drawer could be open, but it left the drawer already. So what do? I have to hide it, right? So I have to read into all these different states. This is the case where, again, the drawer is open, but it's not over the area of the drawer. So I have to do something different. And then, again, this is the debugger I was showing you before. So if I want to turn this on really quick, I just change my variable here to yes or to no, and then it shows up as necessary. Any questions so far? Okay, I know this is a lot to take in one day. And maybe I'm reaching the end of your attention span. What else can I show you? What else did I learn that was really difficult? Oh, yes, one last thing. This is actually really cool, okay? Let me show you something. Who's heard of the fat finger syndrome? Is that what you call it? Okay. So think about the difference of dragging something when you have this, a mouse and a tiny little hand to the difference of your actual finger dragging something around, right? So one of the things I learned is it would impact where my other piece would end up, whether I started here, dragging it from this end, or from this end. Because then my match was completely different. So if I would start dragging it from this end, then my piece would shift to the other side, and then my finger would cover the piece. And even though it was there, it was present, I couldn't see it. I was like, I cannot see the piece. This is not going to work. So what I did is I actually literally, let me just open up the piece here. I actually dissected the piece in 3 different sections. So as I start interacting, I know if I started on the left, on the center, and on the right. And once I read that, I can go ahead and change my offset. So if I start all the way to the right, I need to shift it a little bit more to the left. If I started all the way to the left, I'm okay because I did get it right. So remember, as you're dragging along, what's gonna drag is really, really close to the left, which is gonna be 0, 0 as far as coordinates are concerned, or all the way to, so if you have 140 pixels piece, it would be impactful to what the other piece is going to end up. So I learned that also the hard way. So I'm going to show you something that's kind of fun. If I get this stuck here, let me see if I can. Well, I have a global variable for that. Let me just do that. Global variable. So is back piece visible? No. So now I want to see my back piece. Okay, so now I should be able to see the other piece. So I bring it here. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so let me show you something. Oh, and the other thing was also where in your drawer you started dragging, right? Because if your offset is really, really wide, but yet you're on this side, your piece is gonna come out. And once it comes out of this area, then where did the piece go? So I read that as well. I divided the board into parts, and I read where I am in the board, and I read where I am touching the piece. So I'm gonna show you, this is a little distracting. Let me put this away. So let's take a look at where I touch it here. I have my offset, so that when I drag it here, I can still see it. And the offset is going, oh, so for those of you that weren't here last time, I want to show you, you can debug by using these things. So these are all my variables, okay? And you can see as you interact with them. So my offset is this one right here, okay? So it shows you that I change my offset according to where I start interacting with the piece. So as I go into the other side, I can readjust it accordingly. The other thing I learned also is as you drag that piece, you have to reset the offset, right? Because if you last time had the piece on that side and your offset was really, really wide, but then you drag it on the other side and your other piece is on the other side, it's just gonna mess this up. So as you see, so my offset, so offset is right here. If my offset is really, really, oh, 1 second, is large. Okay. As I drag it, as I let it go, it goes back to 80. I realized that 80 was kind of the magic number, unless I was in a completely extreme scenario. And that's how you optimize for touch. Yeah. I'm gonna stop. It's been a long day. Any questions? Go ahead.
I have a question. Actually, I'm new to Axure. I'm a software developer and web developer.
I heard of wonderful classes going on here in London. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising because actually implementing this using, like, as a software developer, trying to implement this, it seems to be so much simpler than actually doing this in Axure.
Yeah, I get this every single time. I get this every single time.
Like, obviously, you just drag it and put it down, so it's surprising. But actually, I have a question. Because anyway, the way I would actually approach this problem is the moment when you click on the puzzle, on the top puzzle piece, it would be to create a new top-level element above of everything outside on the page. And you know, you can drag it then wherever you want, and the moment you let it go, you just check if it should be inserted into the destination panel. And I'm wondering, is it not possible or like easier for people to do it like?
Yeah, so imagine having like 3 layers, and the last layer is the upper kind of layer, right? So you bring it into the front layer, do whatever you need to do, drag it and bring it back, right? Is that what you're saying?
More or less. Yeah.
Let me think why I didn't think about it that way.
Now you need to have those both panels touching each other, so
it
seems like you're actually dragging an element. But actually, if you just make this element a new element, not in any of those, but on top of both of them, then you could even move those panels aside, and you would still be able to drag from one place.
Yeah, so the thing is, once you have it in that panel, Axure would honor that coordinate forever, right? So as you're dragging it in and out, or you know, if you switch to a other dynamic panel and you're not looking at it, it would honor that. So I think what you are mentioning would make it a little tricky in the sense that there will be so much logic behind that, because then you will have to understand, okay, so as I'm dragging this, is the drawer open? So should I fall here? Should it fall here? Or should it fall on this other dynamic panel, right? So I will have to start like also having an acknowledgement of where each panel is, at what state. Is it open? Is it closed? Is it a place where I actually can drop something? So for example, you cannot drop a piece into here. Well, you see that's some of the magic there. But yeah, one of the things I didn't want people to do is to actually drop a piece in the actual interaction, because then it would create a lot of noise. So then you'll have to kind of think about all of that. But I'm pretty sure you can approach this 100 other different ways. I just went for this one. So, but you're welcome to send me an equivalent. Any other questions? Okay.
It's definitely brilliant for mobile. I mean, for mobile prototyping. Any other applications that we could do? Obviously, we're looking at a game at the moment, but optimizing for touch in Axure, I find it quite challenging. And obviously, what needs to happen now is everyone sort of going home and testing it and see sort of when sort of the next application is going to be. I mean, just to sort of get the full extent of the you know, the potential of this, because it's definitely, I mean, it's the first time I can see this happening. I say, I mean, I can see it happening in a work environment to actually doing an application or something. Yeah, definitely. Not exactly a question.
No, but it's a very good point. So like people would come up to me and say, so what's the point? Well, the point is that some people go home and, you know, watch TV or read a book. I like to do things like this, right? And and then out of many other things, and then when I'm at work and I'm trying to put something together really quick, all the learnings are in the back of my head. I have a few books that I really like. I actually had an author, one of the mobile, I don't know if you heard of Leonard. He wrote a really good book about mobile prototyping in Axure, and I had him in one of my meetups last year via Skype. And that's a way to learn, and I read his book, and they're really good. But I also like to kind of push the limits. It's like, is this possible? How would I solve this problem, you know? So then when I come to work, I sometimes solve things maybe faster, or I realize that I shouldn't go down that road because I tried it and that's not gonna work. So yeah, it was just kind of having fun.
I'm guessing that for tablets probably is gonna be quite good. I mean, after you've tried that, because I mean, I guess you see the gestures a little bit more on tablets and even
there's a lot of things.
If there was a news site or something, or you know, like a shopping basket interaction kind of thing, that's when it's quite relevant.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? So on tablets, you're like, okay, so it's going to be wider. But yeah, what about a shopping basket interaction? You only have such a small amount of space allocated into that. And it's most likely going to be a global thing. So it's going to have to be able to kind of have some memory that you can open and close and so on and so forth. So yeah, I definitely think I'll learn something. You know, I learned something by doing this. So, and I'm really hoping that I can kind of facilitate some learning as well. So we'll see what happens. Any other questions? No? Okay, I really try kind of keeping it both levels, very, very beginners, and then challenging some of the people that may be more seasoned prototypers. So I hope that works for everyone, because I really want to have a nice kind of diverse group coming to learn a little bit about Axure and different things. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. So going back to my PowerPoint, we saw this. Very special thanks to Peter for recording this, and it would allow you to go home. I'll send a link out once it's available, and maybe see some of this again if there's something that wasn't clear. My accent may have gotten in the way or something. All right, cool. So this is where I get to tell everyone, if you really, really enjoy it, please rate this meetup. It is very important that people go back home and say, I'm exhausted, but it was pretty good. Or if you're not happy with the content, email me first and we'll have a conversation. Because people do care about those ratings. I do, and I mean mostly like newcomers that will see how helpful it is. So follow us on Twitter. If you would like to write a blog post on AxureLondon.com, let me know. There is a website called AxureLondon.com that I happen to know who owns it. Any suggestions for the next meeting? I thought of doing maybe parallax kind of interactions, because they're just so popular now. And it has a lot to do with some of the stuff I learned here. Yeah, I see a few notes. So unless I hear from you, most likely I will go for that. If you wanna have, I don't know, I'm thinking how to keep it all the levels. If you wanna have like Axure basics, one a year, I can also do that. Or you can go to my one day, so yeah, feedback, questions, there is the email, and I really hope you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for having you and being brave enough to come all the way over here, okay? I hope to see you next time.